Sometimes the hardest thing is letting someone see who you really are. In 1890s Arizona, Maggie Bell, 37, arrives at Cole Taggart's ranch seeking only work. No love, no complications. Cole, a widower at 39, hasn't opened his heart since losing his wife 3 years ago. He hires Maggie, recognizing something familiar in her guarded eyes. Over days of mending fences and morning coffee, an unexpected bond forms between two wounded souls. It's not romance built on grand gestures, but something deeper, trust earned through shared labor and quiet understanding. As the desert sun sets, walls begin to crumble. But when two people have sworn off love, what happens when it shows up wearing work boots? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust rose in small clouds behind the tired horse as it climbed the winding path toward the Taggart ranch. Late afternoon sun painted the Arizona landscape in shades of copper and gold, the kind of light that made everything look like it belonged in a memory rather than the present moment. Maggie Bell sat straight in the saddle despite the ache in her back, despite the hunger gnawing at her stomach, despite the fear that had been her companion for the better part of 2 years. Her coat, worn leather-patched and restitched in a dozen places, hung loose on her frame. She'd lost weight on the road, though she'd been thin to begin with. The coat told its own story if anyone cared to read it. A life of hard use, careful repair, determination to make things last when there was nothing else to spare. She'd stitched it herself by firelight more times than she could count. Each repair a small act of defiance against a world that seemed bent on wearing her down to nothing. The ranch house came into view as she crested the final rise. It was sturdy, practical, built from local timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and eastern side. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the warmth of the day. Corrals stretched to the south, holding perhaps 24 head of cattle. A barn stood solid and well-maintained, its doors open to the afternoon breeze. Everything spoke of care, of attention to detail, of a man who took pride in what he'd built. Maggie had learned to read places like some people read books. This ranch told her Cole Taggart was methodical, probably solitary, and unlikely to suffer fools. The question was whether he'd suffer a woman looking for work. Most wouldn't. Most would take one look at her worn coat and tired horse and send her on her way with maybe a meal if she was lucky, advice to find a husband if she wasn't. She'd stopped expecting luck a long time ago. A man emerged from the barn as she approached, tall and lean with the kind of build that came from decades of physical work. He wore a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a hat that had seen better years. His face was weathered, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth, not from smiling, she thought, but from squinting into too many sunrises and carrying too many burdens. He moved with the easy confidence of someone on his own land, but there was something careful in the way he watched her approach. Wary, maybe, or just used to being alone. Cole Taggart had been mucking out stalls when he heard the horse. He'd known someone was coming before he saw them. You developed a sixth sense about such things when you lived remote like this. He'd expected the mail carrier, or maybe old Pete returning from his weekly trip to town. He hadn't expected a woman alone, sitting tall on a horse that looked about as tired as Cole felt most days. He studied her as she approached, taking in details the way he'd learned to take in details about livestock and weather and land. She was older than girls who usually passed through looking for work. Thank God for that. He had no patience for silly notions and romantic dreams. There was something solid about her, something that had been tested and hadn't quite broken. Her eyes met his directly, no coyness or flirtation, just a level assessment that matched his own. "Help you?" he called when she was close enough for conversation. "Looking for work." Her voice was lower than he'd expected, roughened by dust and distance. "Heard in town you might need a hand." Heard wrong, most likely. He walked closer, studying her horse now. The animal was sound enough, just tired and in need of good feed. "Don't usually hire women?" She cut him off, but there was no heat in it. Just a statement of fact, a conversation she'd had before. I can mend fence, tend a garden, handle livestock, cook, clean, and fix just about anything that breaks. I don't drink, don't steal, and I mind my own business. I'm not looking for charity, and I'm not looking for anything but honest work for honest pay. Cole found himself almost smiling at her. Directness, almost. He'd forgotten how to smile properly. 3 years ago when he'd buried Sarah, and he hadn't found much reason to relearn. Wasn't going to say that, he said, though he had been. Who was going to say I don't usually hire anyone? I work alone. Looks like good land to work alone on. Maggie glanced around, taking in the ranch with an evaluating eye. But I'm guessing you could use help, whether you want to admit it or not. That north fence line is sagging. Your garden's overgrown. And unless I'm mistaken, those shutters on the main house need repair before winter. He followed her gaze, irritated that she'd spotted things he'd been meaning to get to but hadn't. The fence had been on his list for 2 months. The garden had gotten away from him after Sarah died. She'd been the one with the touch for growing things. The shutters he'd been ignoring, because they reminded him too much of Sarah's. Voice telling him to fix them properly, instead of slapping on a quick patch. You've got a sharp eye, he said. Finally, I've got a need for work, she corrected. And you've got work that needs doing. Seems practical to me. There it was again, that straightforward quality that caught him off guard. No pleading, no trying to make him feel sorry for her. Just a simple exchange. She had skills, he had work. What was complicated about that? Everything, if he was honest. Hiring her meant having someone around, meant conversation and presence, and breaking the careful solitude he'd built like a fortress around himself. It meant change. And he'd had enough change to last a lifetime when Sarah's fever had taken her in the space of 4 terrible days. But the fence really did need fixing, and the garden was a waste of good soil. And winter would come whether he repaired those shutters or not. There's a cabin, he heard himself say. Used to house a ranch hand back when my father ran this place. It's small but sound. You'd take your meals in the main house. I pay fair, $30 a month plus room and board. Something shifted in her expression, relief maybe, or perhaps just the easing of tension she'd been carrying. That's generous. That's the job. You work sunup to sundown, 6 days a week. Sundays are your own. I don't pry into anyone's business, and I expect the same courtesy. He paused, then added, I'm Cole Taggart, Maggie Bell. Well then, Maggie Bell, you want to see the cabin before you decide? I've already decided, she said. Just needed you to decide too. This time he did smile, just a small quirk at the corner of his mouth, surprised out of him. Come on then. Let's get your horse settled first. As Maggie dismounted, her legs nearly buckled beneath her. She caught herself on the saddle. Grateful Cole had already turned toward the barn and hadn't seen the moment of weakness. She'd been riding for 3 days straight with minimal rest, pushing herself and her horse to reach the Taggart ranch before her money ran out completely. The $6 in her pocket represented everything she had left in the world. The barn was as well maintained as the rest of the ranch, cool and dim with the sweet smell of hay and leather. 4 stalls, 2 occupied by a sturdy gelding and a grey mare. Good animals, well cared for. Maggie led her horse to an empty stall and began unsaddling, her hands moving with the automatic competence of someone who'd been doing such work since childhood. Cole brought water and feed without being asked, and they worked in companionable silence. It was one of the things Maggie would come to appreciate about him. He didn't need to fill every moment with words. Some people talked to avoid thinking or feeling. Cole seemed to do his deepest thinking in silence. You come far? He asked as she brushed down her horse. Kansas. Been traveling a couple months. She didn't elaborate and he didn't push. That was the bargain of the West. You let a person's past be their past, unless they chose to share it. Long ride alone for a woman. Long ride for anyone, she agreed. But sometimes you do what needs doing. He nodded, understanding that sentiment to his bones. When Sarah had died, he'd thought about leaving, about selling the ranch and starting somewhere new where every corner didn't hold a memory. But you couldn't outrun grief any more than you could outrun your own shadow. Sometimes you just had to stand still and let it wash over you until you learned to live with it. The cabin sat about 200 yards from the main house, tucked against a stand of juniper trees that provided afternoon shade. It was indeed small. One room with a stone fireplace, a wooden bed frame, a table with 2 chairs and shelves built into the walls. But it was clean, the roof was sound, and there was a window that looked east toward the mountains. "I'll bring bedding," Cole said from the doorway. "There's a pump out back for water. Privy's about 50 feet that direction," he pointed. "You need anything else to get settled?" "This is more than enough." Maggie set her saddlebags on the table, everything she owned in the world, contained in 2 bags and a bedroll. "Thank you, Mr. Taggart." Cole. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with formality. "We're going to be working together, might as well use names." "Cole, then." She met his eyes again, that direct gaze that seemed to see more than most people bothered to look for. "I won't let you down." "Didn't think you would," he said, and meant it. There was something in her, a core of steel wrapped in weariness, that reminded him of the old-timers he'd known growing up. People who'd survived things that should have broken them, and came out the other side harder, but not cruel. "I'll bring that bedding and we'll get you some supper. You look like you could use both." After he left, Maggie sat on the edge of the bare bed frame and allowed herself a moment. Just one moment to feel the relief of having a roof overhead and the promise of regular meals. Just one moment to acknowledge how close she'd come to having nothing, to being nothing. Then she stood, straightened her patched coat and began unpacking. There would be time for rest later. For now, she had a new start to build, board by careful board. In the main house, Cole stood in the kitchen and wondered what exactly he'd just done. He'd meant what he said about working alone, about keeping to himself. For 3 years, he'd managed just fine, with occasional help from old Pete, who came around when the work demanded it, but otherwise left him in peace. Now, he'd hired a woman with shadows in her eyes and secrets in her past. And he had no earthly idea what had possessed him, except he did know. He'd seen something in Maggie Bell that he recognized from his own mirror, the look of someone who'd lost something essential and was trying to figure out how to keep going anyway. The look of someone who'd learned that life doesn't ask permission before it takes what you love. He pulled linens from the closet Sarah had organized with such care, sheets that still smelled faintly of the lavender she'd loved. Round his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, her wedding ring hung on a leather cord where he'd placed it after the funeral. He touched it briefly through the fabric, the way he did 100 times a day, without thinking. "Don't know what you'd make of this, Sarah," he said quietly to the empty house. "Woman showed up needing work and I gave it to her. Practical decision, that's all. Nothing more than that." The house didn't answer, but then it never did. The silence that had been his companion for 3 years remained unchanged. And Cole carried the linens out into the evening air, where smoke from Maggie's chimney was already beginning to rise against the darkening sky. By the time Maggie woke the next morning to the sound of a rooster's crow, the sun was already painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, canvas pants that had once belonged to her father and a sturdy shirt she'd traded for in New Mexico. Her hair she braided and pinned close to her head, practical and out of the way. Cole was already in the barn when she arrived, forking hay to the horses. He glanced up at her approach, nodded once, and went back to his work. No greeting, no small talk, just acknowledgement. Maggie appreciated that. She'd had enough of men who felt the need to fill every silence with their own voices. "Coffee's on in the house," he said after a while. "Help yourself. We'll start on the north fence after breakfast." The kitchen was warm from the stove, the coffee strong and dark the way she liked it. Maggie found eggs and bacon, cooked enough for 2, and had plates on the table by the time Cole came in. He stopped in the doorway, something flickering across his face. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort. She realized too late that she'd overstepped, assuming too much about their arrangement. "I can eat in the cabin," she said quickly. "Didn't mean to—" "No!" He cut her off, moving to the table. "No, this is good. Practical." That word again, practical, like he needed to remind himself that's all this was. Saves time to eat together before the day starts. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, birds called to each other in the morning light. The coffee was good. The eggs were cooked properly. These small things mattered when so much else felt uncertain. "You know fence work?" Cole asked finally, mopping up egg with a piece of bread. "Grew up on a farm in Missouri. Fixed enough fence to stretch from here to California, I'd imagine." "Good." He stood, carried his plate to the sink. "We'll need to replace about 30 yards of post and wire. It's physical work." "I didn't come here for easy," Maggie said, and so they began. 2 weeks passed in this manner, settling into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable. Maggie proved herself capable at every task Cole set before her. The fence work, tending the cattle, repairing the sagging gate on the south pasture. She was strong for her size, uncomplaining, and possessed of the kind of practical intelligence that came from years of making do with whatever was at hand. She also left him alone in ways that mattered. She didn't pry into his past or ask about the wedding ring she'd surely noticed on the cord around his neck. She didn't rearrange things in the house or try to put her own stamp on his space. She simply worked, ate, and retired to her cabin each evening, respecting the boundaries he'd laid out without making it feel like a burden. Old Pete showed up midway through the second week. His grey beard full and wild, his eyes sharp as ever, despite his age. He'd worked for Cole's father and had known Cole since he was a boy. He took one look at Maggie working alongside Cole to repair the corral fence and let out a low whistle. "Got yourself some help, I see," Pete said, swinging down from his mule with the stiffness of advancing years. "Maggie, this is Pete Carson. He helps out when the work gets heavy. Pete Maggie Bell. She's hired on." Pete touched his hat brim to Maggie, his eyes assessing but not unkind. "Ma'am, good to see some sense being brought to this place. Boy works himself half to death when I'm not around. I'm 39, Pete, hardly a boy. You're a boy to me until I'm dead, and maybe after." Pete grinned, showing gaps in his teeth. "You know your way around a ranch, Miss Bell." "Well enough," Maggie said. "And it's just Maggie, fair enough. Just Pete, then." He turned to Cole. "Came to help with the branding, but looks like you got things well in hand." The three of them worked together for the next 4 days, and something shifted in the dynamic. Pete's easy humor drew out responses from both Cole and Maggie. Not much, neither of them were given to excessive talk, but small comments that almost qualified as conversation. Pete told old stories about Cole's father, about the ranch in its early days, about winters that nearly killed them all, and summers that saved them. He asked Maggie about Missouri and didn't push when her answers stayed surface level. On the evening of the 4th day, after Pete had ridden out and Maggie had returned to her cabin, Cole stood on his porch and looked out over the ranch. The fence was repaired. The branding was done. The place looked better than it had in 3 years. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, he felt unsettled in ways he couldn't quite name. Having Maggie here had changed things in small, subtle ways he was only beginning to notice. The house smelled like cooking again, instead of cold coffee and bachelor neglect. The morning routine had a shape to it, a structure that went beyond just him and his grief. He touched the ring through his shirt, that habitual gesture. "I'm just being practical, Sarah," he said to the evening air. Good help is hard to find, but as he said it, he knew he was lying to himself. And he suspected Sarah, wherever she was, knew it too. It was a Thursday afternoon, warm and still, when everything changed. Cole had asked Maggie to help clean the main house, the first time he'd invited her inside, beyond the kitchen. She could tell it cost him something to ask, see it in the way he didn't quite meet her eyes when he made the request. "Place has gotten away from me," he admitted. "If you're willing, I'd appreciate the help. But if it's not, it's fine," she said simply. "I don't mind." The main house was larger than it appeared from outside. A front room with a stone fireplace, the kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small room that Sarah had apparently used for sewing. Dust covered most surfaces, and there was a stillness to the air that spoke of spaces long undisturbed. Maggie worked methodically, sweeping and dusting, washing windows, being careful not to move things from where they'd been placed. This was someone's home once. She wouldn't disrupt it more than necessary. In the kitchen, she found herself drawn to the shelves where dishes were stored. Next to the plates sat a collection of jars containing dried herbs and spices, neatly labeled in a woman's careful hand. Below that, tucked in a drawer she opened, looking for clean rags, was a book. Not just any book, a handwritten cookbook, the pages filled with recipes in the same careful script as the jar labels. Sarah's recipes. Sarah's hand. Sarah's life preserved in measurements and instructions, in notes about adjusting for altitude and suggestions for substitutions when ingredients were scarce. Maggie sat at the kitchen table and began reading, drawn into the intimate record of a woman she'd never met. There were recipes for bread, stews, preserves, cakes. Margin notes revealed small pieces of Sarah's personality. Cole likes extra pepper, or make double. Pete will show up hungry, or better in winter when the air is cold. She was so absorbed in reading that she didn't hear Cole come in until he spoke. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharp, controlled anger underneath. Maggie looked up to find him standing in the kitchen doorway, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. She started to explain, to apologize. But he cut her off. "That's Sarah's. That's private." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the book from her hands, not roughly, but firmly. "You had no right. I was looking for rags. I found it in the drawer. I'm sorry, I didn't mean what? To go through my dead wife's things." The words came out harsh, edged with a pain so raw it made Maggie flinch. "To treat her life like it's something for you to browse through." Maggie stood, her own anger rising to meet his. "I was reading recipes, not going through her private correspondence. The book was in a kitchen drawer with the dish towels. How was I supposed to know you'd kept it like a shrine?" "Oh, don't." Cole's voice dropped, dangerous and quiet. "Don't you dare." "Don't I dare what?" "Point out that you've kept this house frozen in time, like she's going to walk back through that door any moment. You hired me to help you, but you won't let anyone touch anything that might remind you she's gone. You wear her ring around your neck, and you talk to empty rooms, and you think I don't notice." The silence that followed felt like broken glass. Cole stared at her, the cookbook clutched in his hands, his face working through emotions too complex for words. Maggie wanted to take the words back, to swallow them down and pretend she hadn't spoken them. She'd overstepped badly. She'd violated the unspoken agreement between them. No prying, no pushing, everyone's grief their own. "I should go," she said quietly. "I'll pack my things." "No." Cole set the cookbook on the table with careful precision. "No, you're right. I have kept things frozen. He stopped, started again. "It's been 3 years and I still can't." Another stop. He sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking every one of his 39 years, and then some. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. You were just doing what I asked you to do." Maggie remained standing, unsure of her ground now. "I shouldn't have looked at it without asking. It's a cookbook in a kitchen drawer. You had every reason to think it was just—" He gestured vaguely. "Just a cookbook." But they both knew it wasn't just a cookbook. It was a piece of Sarah, tangible and real, her voice speaking across the years, through instructions for making bread and stew. Maggie pulled out the other chair and sat across from him. Outside, afternoon light slanted through the window, painting the table in gold. The cookbook sat between them, like a small monument to all the things they weren't saying. "Tell me about her," Maggie said softly. Cole looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because she matters to you. Because her absence is here in every room. Because maybe—" Maggie hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because maybe talking about her is better than trying to pretend the pain isn't there." For a long moment, Cole didn't speak. Then slowly, as if testing whether the words would shatter him, he began. "She was strong. Not physically necessarily, though she could work as hard as any ranch hand when needed. But strong in her heart. She knew who she was and what she stood for, and she never wavered from it." His hand moved to the cookbook, fingers tracing the worn cover. "She grew up in town, daughter of the general store owner. Had no business marrying a rancher and coming out here to the middle of nowhere. But she did it anyway. Did you know right away that she was the one?" "No." A ghost of a smile touched his face. "Took me 6 months to work up the courage to talk to her properly. Another 3 to court her. Another year to convince her father I was worthy. She used to tease me about it, said I moved slower than winter coming on. How long were you married? 15 years. The words carried weight, the heft of shared history and accumulated days. We had a good life. Worked hard, laughed when we could. Tried for children. His voice caught slightly. Never happened. Sarah had 3 miscarriages, and after the 3rd, we stopped trying. It broke something in her, I think. Or maybe just shifted things. We learned to be enough for each other. What happened? Maggie asked gently. When she... Fever. Cole's voice went flat, reciting facts to keep emotion at bay. Came on fast. One day she was fine, next day she couldn't get out of bed. I rode to town for the doctor, but it was too late. 4 days later she was gone. He was quiet for a moment. She died in our bedroom. I haven't slept there since. Maggie reached across the table and laid her hand over his. Not a romantic gesture, just human comfort for human pain. Cole looked at their hands like he couldn't quite understand what he was seeing. I'm sorry, Maggie said. For your loss. For looking at the book without permission. For saying what I said. I've got no right to judge how anyone deals with grief. You weren't wrong, though. Cole's fingers tightened briefly on hers before pulling away. I have kept things frozen. I keep telling myself I'm being practical, maintaining what we built together. But really, I've just been too afraid to move forward. Moving forward feels like leaving her behind. Maybe it doesn't have to be one or the other, Maggie offered. Maybe you can remember her and still let new things in. Is that what you do? Cole asked, meeting her eyes directly. With whatever you left behind in Kansas? It was Maggie's turn to look away. I try. Some days are better than others. What did you leave behind? She could have deflected, could have kept her own walls intact while his came down. But that felt unfair somehow, cowardly. If he could open his old wounds, she could at least acknowledge hers existed. A husband, she said quietly. Not by choice, by necessity. Cole waited, not pushing, and the patience in his silence pulled more words from her. His name was Frank. We married young. I was 19, he was 22. He was charming at first, attentive, made me feel special, she paused. Then he started drinking. And when he drank, he got mean. And when he got mean, She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering breaks that had healed crooked. He used his fists more than his words toward the end. You left, eventually. Took me longer than it should have. Kept thinking he'd change, that the man I married was still in there somewhere. She laughed bitterly. Took him nearly killing me one night to finally understand that man was never real. So I waited until he passed out drunk, packed what I could carry, took my horse, and rode west. Been moving ever since until I got here. Does he know where you are? I hope not. I've been careful, used my maiden name, avoided places where anyone might know him. But Frank's persistent when he wants something, and he'd see my leaving as theft of his property, meaning me. Cole's jaw tightened. You're not property. You're a person with every right to leave a bad situation. Try telling that to a judge if Frank ever catches up to me. Law sees it different than we might wish. They sat in the kitchen as the afternoon light faded, 2 people who'd lost pieces of themselves to grief and violence, trying to figure out how to be whole again. The cookbook remained on the table between them, no longer a source of conflict, but somehow a bridge, proof that pain could be survived, that love could be remembered without drowning in the loss of it. I'm going to leave it out, Cole said finally, touching the cookbook again. No more hiding it away. Sarah would have wanted her recipes used, not gathering dust in a drawer. She must have been a good cook. She was. Better than me, anyway. I've been living on beans and bacon for 3 years. He managed a real smile this time, small but genuine. Think you could teach me some of what's in there? I could try, Maggie said, if you promise not to bite my head off when I open drawers. Fair enough. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. We good? We're good. As Maggie left the main house and walked back to her cabin through the evening air, she felt lighter somehow. The confrontation had been painful, but necessary, like lancing a wound so it could heal properly. They'd shared pieces of their pasts, acknowledged their broken places, and somehow the ranch felt more solid under her feet for it. In the main house, Cole opened Sarah's cookbook and began reading through the recipes by lamplight. It hurt, seeing her handwriting, remembering her in the kitchen with flour on her hands and a smile on her face. But it was a good hurt, the kind that reminded him she'd been real, that their love had been real, that the life they'd built together mattered, even though it had ended. He came to a recipe for bread, Sarah's note suggesting it was best made in the morning when the kitchen was cool. In the margin she'd written, "Cole says this is the best bread in Arizona. Don't let him eat the whole loaf before dinner." This time, when Cole smiled, there were tears on his face. But he didn't close the book. Instead, he turned the page and kept reading, letting the memories wash over him, learning that love didn't have to be buried to be honored. That night, Maggie lay in her narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the desert evening, wind in the juniper trees, an owl hunting, the distant call of coyotes. She thought about Cole and his careful grief, about Sarah and her recipes, about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place. She'd come looking for honest work, nothing more. She'd built walls around her heart that would put any fortress to shame. She'd sworn she was done with men, done with trust, done with anything that required her to be vulnerable. But something was shifting, slow as seasons changing. In the space of one afternoon, she and Cole had moved from careful distance to something approaching understanding. It wasn't friendship yet, and it certainly wasn't anything romantic. But it was real and honest, and perhaps that was enough for now. Tomorrow they'd go back to mending fences and tending cattle. Tomorrow they'd maintain the comfortable silence and the practical rhythm they'd established. But underneath it something had changed. The walls were still there, but now there were windows in them, small openings that let light through. Maggie pulled her patched coat over the thin blanket and closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she didn't dream of running. The following week brought work that required Cole and Maggie to spend long hours in close quarters. The north gate, the main entrance to the larger pasture, had finally given up entirely. The wood was rotted through, the hinges rusted beyond saving. It needed to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that meant sawing, measuring, fitting pieces together with precision. They worked side by side in the morning heat, Cole cutting timber while Maggie held pieces steady. The physical labor was demanding but satisfying in the way of work that showed immediate results. By midday, they'd framed out the new gate structure. By afternoon, they were fitting hinges and testing the swing. "You're handy with tools," Cole observed, watching Maggie countersink screws with practiced efficiency. "My father was a carpenter before he took up farming. Taught me the trade young." She tested the hinge, satisfied with its movement. Said a woman who could fix what broke would never lack for work. Smart man, he was. There was grief in her voice, old and settled. "Died when I was 16. Farming accident. Mother followed 2 years later, I think from loneliness more than any sickness. That's when I married Frank. Thought I needed someone to take care of me." She laughed without humor. "Turns out I was better at taking care of myself all along." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the sound of hammering and sawing filling the air. Cole found himself noticing small things about Maggie, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she'd push stray hair from her face with the back of her wrist when her hands were dirty, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes when something fit together properly. "Can I ask you something?" he said as they took a water break in the shade. "Depends on what you're asking. Why Arizona? You could have stopped anywhere between Kansas and here. Why come this far?" Maggie considered the question, taking a long drink from the canteen. "I wanted distance, enough miles that Frank wouldn't think to look. And I'd heard the territories were more accepting of women on their own. Figured if I couldn't find ranch work, maybe I could find something else. Cooking in a boarding house, clerking in a store." She handed him the canteen. "Plus, I'd never seen mountains like these. Seemed like a good place for a new start. Is it?" "A good place, I mean?" She met his eyes, something shifting in her expression. "Better than I hoped for. You're a fair boss, Cole Taggart. And the work's honest. That's more than a lot of people get." "I like having you here," Cole said, then immediately looked away, uncomfortable with the admission. "I mean having the help, and things are getting done that I'd let slide. Place looks better. That's all I meant." "I know what you meant." There was gentleness in Maggie's voice. And for what it's worth, I like being here. First time in a long time I've felt—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Safe, like I can stop looking over my shoulder for a while." They returned to work on the gate, but something had shifted again. Not dramatically, not even visibly to an outside observer, but in the space between words, in the comfortable silences and shared effort, something was building. Neither of them wanted to name it or examine it too closely. Both of them had been burned by hope before, but it was there nonetheless, patient and persistent as spring grass pushing through hard ground. By evening, the gate was finished. They stood back and admired their work. Solid construction, smooth operation, built to last another decade at least. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. "Good work," Cole said. "We make a decent team." "Yeah." He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just a hired hand, but a person, a woman with her own history and her own scars, who'd traveled hundreds of miles alone to find a place she could stop running. "We do." They walked back to the main house together, their shoulders nearly touching. The evening air was cool after the day's heat, carrying the smell of sage and dust and possibility. Neither of them spoke, but both were thinking the same thing, that this felt right somehow. That working together, being together in the quiet spaces of daily life, felt like something worth protecting. Young Tommy showed up the next morning, arriving just after dawn, with his perpetually crooked hat and eager smile. He was 16, all gangly limbs and enthusiasm, hired by Cole to help with the horses and general ranch work when he wasn't needed at his father's farm down the valley. "Morning, Mr. Taggart," Tommy called out, then spotted Maggie emerging from her cabin. His eyes went wide. "Oh, ma'am, I didn't know." "This is Maggie Bell," Cole said. "She's hired on to help around the place." "Maggie, this is Tommy Brennan. He comes by 3 days a week to work with the horses and handle whatever else needs doing. Pleased to meet you, Tommy." Maggie shook his hand, amused by his obvious surprise at finding a woman working the ranch. "You too, ma'am." "I mean, Miss Bell, He flushed red. "I'll just go tend the horses now." He practically ran to the barn, and Maggie couldn't help but smile. "Sweet kid. Good worker," Cole agreed. "Reminds me of myself at that age. All energy and no sense of direction." They spent the morning working separately, Cole and Tommy in the south pasture, checking cattle, Maggie tackling the overgrown garden that had been Sarah's pride. The soil was still good, and with some clearing and weeding it could produce again. Maggie found satisfaction in the work, her hands in the earth, coaxing life from ground that had been neglected. She was on her knees pulling weeds when she heard the commotion from the barn. Tommy's voice, high and frightened. "Mr. Taggart! Mr. Taggart, help!" Maggie was on her feet and running before conscious thought kicked in. She reached the barn to find Tommy on the ground, clutching his leg, one of the horses, the grey mare, stomping nervously nearby. Cole was already there, kneeling beside the boy. "What happened?" Maggie asked, taking in the situation quickly. "Rosie got spooked," Tommy gasped. "Kicked me. I wasn't paying attention. Came up on her wrong side. Let me see." Maggie knelt beside Cole, gently examining Tommy's leg. The kick had caught him above the knee, and already a massive bruise was forming. But when she carefully felt along the bone, nothing seemed broken. "Can you move it?" Tommy gritted his teeth and flexed his leg. "Yeah, hurts like blazes, though." "I bet it does." Maggie's voice was calm, practical. "Cole, we need to get him to the house. Ice from the cold cellar if you have any, and we'll need to wrap it." Together they helped Tommy up, supporting him between them as he hobbled to the house. Maggie moved with quick efficiency, fetching ice, wrapping the injured leg, checking for signs of more serious damage. Her hands were gentle but confident, and Cole found himself watching her with something like wonder. "You've done this before," he observed. "Too many times." Maggie secured the wrapping. Frank wasn't the only one getting hurt on that farm. Livestock accidents, just the general danger of working land. She turned to Tommy. "You'll be sore for a week, but you'll heal. Next time, make sure Rosie sees you coming. Horses spook when surprised." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm sorry, Mr. Taggart, I should have been more careful." "Accidents happen," Cole said. "You rest here for a bit. I'll send word to your father that you're all right, but might need a ride home." After Tommy was settled with a glass of water and instructions to stay off the leg, Cole and Maggie stepped outside. The morning had warmed considerably, the sun climbing toward noon. "Thank you," Cole said, "for handling that so well. I would have managed, but you knew exactly what to do. Like I said, too much practice." Maggie looked back toward the house. "He's a good kid. Reminds me of my younger brother before—" She stopped, shook her head. "Doesn't matter. You had a brother?" "Have, maybe. I don't know. Lost touch after I married Frank. He didn't approve of Frank, tried to warn me. I didn't listen. We had words and then—" She spread her hands. "Then years passed and I didn't know how to reach out. Didn't know if he'd want to hear from me after I'd ignored his warning." Cole understood that particular flavor of regret. People hold grudges less than we think. "If you wanted to try reaching out, maybe someday." Maggie turned to head back to the garden. "For now, I've got weeds to pull and vegetables to plant." "Maggie," Cole's voice stopped her. "You were good with him, calm, kind. He was scared and you made him feel safe. That's a gift." She didn't respond, just nodded once and walked away. But Cole saw the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, saw her touch her hand to her chest like she was holding on to something precious. The compliment had landed, had meant something to a woman who'd probably been told more often what she did wrong than what she did right. That evening, after Tommy's father had come to collect him with promises that the boy would be fine, Cole found himself on the porch with coffee and the cookbook. He'd been reading through it in the evenings, learning or relearning recipes, letting Sarah's voice speak to him through instructions and margin notes. Maggie emerged from her cabin and walked toward the main house, stopping when she saw him on the porch. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Not at all." She settled into the chair beside his, accepting the coffee he poured from the pot he'd brought out. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors as it sank toward the horizon. "I've been thinking," Cole said eventually, "about what you said the other day. About me keeping things frozen. I had no right." "No, you were right. And I've been trying to change it. Little things like reading Sarah's recipes. Like leaving her things where they belong, instead of hidden away like secrets." He paused. "Like letting someone else into the house without feeling like it's a betrayal." "It's not a betrayal to keep living, Cole. I know. Or I'm learning to know it anyway." He looked at her in the fading light. "You've helped with that, just by being here. By being," he searched for the right word, "real. You don't tiptoe around my grief or pretend it doesn't exist. You just let it be what it is and keep moving forward. There's strength in that." "Or stubbornness," Maggie said wryly. "Hard to tell the difference sometimes." Maybe they're the same thing. They lapsed into silence again, but it was warm with understanding. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, thousands of them, more than Maggie remembered seeing in Kansas, where town lights obscured the view. Cole's hand rested on the arm of his chair, close enough that Maggie could have reached over and touched it. She thought about it, wondered what it would mean if she did. Not a romantic gesture necessarily, just connection, acknowledgement that they were becoming something to each other beyond employer and employee. In the end, she kept her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. There would be time for other gestures, other meanings. For now, it was enough to sit together in the evening air. Two people learning that healing didn't have to mean forgetting, and that new beginnings could honor what came before. "Thank you," Maggie said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a chance. For seeing me as capable instead of broken. For not asking questions you knew I wasn't ready to answer." She met his eyes. "For making me feel like I belong somewhere again." Cole felt something shift in his chest, some locked door easing open. "You do belong here, Maggie. However long you want to stay. Careful," she said with a small smile. "I might take you up on that. I hope you do." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Neither pushed for more, both content to let things develop at their own pace. They'd both learned patience the hard way, learned that some things couldn't be rushed without breaking. But sitting there under the emerging stars, Cole felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind that demanded immediate resolution, but the quiet, steady kind that could wait, that trusted in tomorrow. Beside him, Maggie felt her own walls continuing to crack, small fissures letting light through. She'd spent so long running, so long protecting herself, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be still, to be seen, to be valued for who she was, rather than what she could provide or endure. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. When they finally said goodnight and went to their separate spaces, Cole to the house, Maggie to her cabin, both carried with them the memory of the evening, of coffee and companionship, of stars and silence, of two damaged people discovering that damage didn't have to be the end of their stories. In the main house, Cole took the wedding ring from around his neck for the first time since Sarah's funeral. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight, remembering the day he'd placed it on her finger. Then gently he set it in a small wooden box on the dresser, not hidden, not forgotten, but no longer worn like armor against the world. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm trying to live again." In her cabin, Maggie pulled out the letter from Kansas she'd received weeks ago and read it again by lamplight. The warning about Frank asking questions, about his drinking and his threats. She should be terrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since she'd arrived at the Taggart ranch, felt something else. Defiance, maybe, or determination. She'd found something here worth protecting. She wasn't going to let fear steal it from her. Maggie folded the letter and placed it in her saddlebag, then blew out the lamp. Tomorrow would bring more work, more moments of quiet understanding, more small steps toward whatever she and Cole were building. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. The wind whispered through the juniper trees, carrying the smell of sage and possibility. In the darkness, the ranch settled into itself, all its pieces in place, all its people finding their way home. 2 weeks later, Cole made something from Sarah's cookbook for the first time. It was bread, the same recipe Sarah had noted was his favorite. He worked slowly, following the instructions carefully, measuring flour and water, kneading the dough the way the recipe described. His hands remembered the motions, even though his mind had tried to forget. Maggie found him in the kitchen, flour dusting his shirt, his expression intense with concentration. "Need help?" she offered. "Maybe. I'm not sure I'm doing this right." She came to stand beside him, looking at the dough. "Looks good to me. What does the recipe say next?" "Let it rise for an hour, then shape and bake." He wiped his hands on a towel. Sarah made it look easy. "I feel like I'm all thumbs. First time's always hard. Second time's easier," Maggie smiled. "Besides, even bad bread is better than no bread." They left the dough to rise and went about other chores, but Cole found himself drawn back to the kitchen every 15 minutes, checking on the progress. When it was finally time to shape and bake, Maggie joined him, and together they formed the loaves and slid them into the oven. The smell that filled the house 40 minutes later was achingly familiar, warm and yeasty and right. Cole stood at the oven, watching through the small window as the loaves browned, and felt tears prick his eyes. "She made this every week," he said quietly. "Sunday mornings before church. I'd wake up to this smell and know everything was right with the world." Maggie stood beside him, not touching but present. "Tell me more about her. What was she like?" "Stubborn," Cole smiled through his tears. "Once she decided something, that was it. She decided this ranch was going to thrive, and she made it happen through sheer force of will. She decided I was worth marrying, and she convinced her father despite his every objection. She decided we'd have a good life even without children, and we did." He paused. "She decided she wasn't going to die from that fever too. But that one she couldn't make happen. I'm sorry you lost her. Me too. Every day I'm sorry." He looked at Maggie. "But I'm also grateful I had her at all. 15 years of loving Sarah Taggart was worth all the grief that came after." The bread finished baking, and they pulled it from the oven. Perfect golden loaves that Sarah would have been proud of. Cole broke one open while it was still steaming, the interior soft and tender, Want to try it? He offered Maggie a piece. She accepted, tasting carefully. Cole Taggart, this is damn good bread, yeah? He tried his own piece, and his face lit with surprise and pleasure. Yeah, it really is. They ate bread with butter at the kitchen table, and it felt like celebration and memorial at once. A way of honoring Sarah while also claiming the skill as his own. A way of moving forward while carrying her memory with him. Would you... Cole started, then stopped, unsure. Would you want to add some of your recipes to the book? Your mother's preserving methods, maybe, or anything else you make? Maggie looked at him, understanding the significance of the offer. This wasn't just Sarah's cookbook anymore. It was becoming something shared, something living. I'd be honored, she said. That evening, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's cookbook and a pen. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Missouri, about the recipes passed down through generations, about the knowledge she carried in her hands and heart. Then she began to write, her script different from Sarah's, but no less careful, adding her own voice to the pages. Cole watched from the doorway unnoticed and felt something in his chest expand. This was right. This was how things should be. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new that honored the past while creating a future. He'd started the day making Sarah's bread, a gesture toward the wife he'd loved. He was ending it watching Maggie add her own recipes to the same book, a gesture toward what? Friendship? Partnership? Something he wasn't quite ready to name? Whatever it was, it felt like hope. The next morning brought mail from town, delivered by old Pete, who'd made his weekly supply run. Most of it was mundane. Catalogues, a letter from Cole's cousin in California, a notice about upcoming territory elections. But there was one letter addressed to Maggie Bell, forwarded from the boarding house where she'd stayed briefly when she first arrived in Arizona. Maggie's face went pale when she saw the envelope, recognizing the handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was from Evelyn Marsh, her former neighbor in Kansas. Maggie read it once, then again, her expression growing more fearful with each word. What is it? Cole asked, alarmed by her reaction. It's Frank. Her voice was hollow. He's been asking about me. Showed up at Evelyn's house 3 weeks ago, drunk and angry, demanding to know where I'd gone. She didn't tell him, swears she didn't, but he said he'd find me anyway. Said I belonged to him, and he'd get me back no matter what it took. Cole took the letter, reading Evelyn's careful words. He's different now, Maggie. Meaner. Whatever was good in him is gone. He talks about you like your property he's lost, not a person. I'm worried about what he'll do if he finds you. Please be careful. How would he find you? Cole asked, trying to think practically despite the cold fear settling in his gut. I don't know. I've been careful. Used my maiden name. Didn't tell anyone where I was headed. Maggie paced the kitchen, her earlier calm shattered. But Frank's persistent. And he has friends. Other men who think wives running away is an insult to decent men everywhere. If someone mentioned seeing a woman alone heading west, if he asked the right questions in the right towns, then he might track you here, Cole finished the thought. But Arizona's a big territory, Maggie. He'd have to get damn lucky to find this specific ranch. Or he'd have to ask at every ranch, every town, every way station between here and Kansas. Maggie stopped pacing, turned to face him. I should leave. I've brought this to your doorstep, and that's not fair to you. Don't, Cole's voice was firm. Don't even think about running again. I'm not running, I'm being practical. If Frank shows up here looking for me, it puts you in danger. So what? You think I can't handle one drunk from Kansas? Cole crossed to her, put his hands on her shoulders. Maggie, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to face this by yourself. You don't understand what he's like when he's angry, maybe not. But I understand that you've got a right to be safe. And I understand that this ranch is your home now, and nobody is going to force you to leave it. Maggie wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that she could stay, that she could have this life she was building. But fear was a powerful thing, and Frank's shadow had followed her across half the country. What if he comes? She whispered. Then we'll deal with it. Together. Cole's hands remained steady on her shoulders. But we're not going to live in fear, waiting for something that might never happen. We're going to be smart, Be watchful and trust that the law out here will see things clearer than it might in Kansas. The law doesn't usually favor women who leave their husbands. Maybe not. But it doesn't favor men who abuse their wives either. And out here, a woman's got more rights than she might have back east." He paused. "And if the law won't help, I've got a rifle and I know how to use it. Cole, I mean it, Maggie. You're under my protection now, and that means something. Frank wants to get to you. He'll have to go through me first." The declaration should have frightened her, the implication of violence, the threat of confrontation. Instead, for the first time since opening the letter, Maggie felt her breath come easier. She wasn't alone. She had someone willing to stand beside her, to fight for her if necessary. "Thank you," she managed. "Nothing to thank me for. Just being practical." He smiled slightly at their old word, the one they used to avoid talking about deeper feelings. "Now let's figure out what precautions we can take. We'll let Pete and Tommy know to watch for strangers asking questions. We'll ride into town and talk to the sheriff, make sure he knows the situation. And we'll go about our lives without letting fear rule us." You make it sound simple. Nothing about this is simple. But hiding never solved anything, and running just means you're always looking over your shoulder. Cole released her shoulders, stepped back. "You've stopped running, Maggie. Don't start again now." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty, even as doubt gnawed at her. They spent the afternoon making plans, practical preparations against a threat that might never materialize. But underneath the planning, Maggie carried a new weight, the knowledge that her past was actively hunting her, that Frank hadn't forgotten or moved on, that the danger she'd been running from for 2 years might finally be catching up. That night, she lay awake in her cabin, listening to every sound. The wind in the trees became footsteps. The call of night birds became whispered threats. Her patched coat hung on its peg near the door, visible in the moonlight, a reminder of everything she'd survived, everything she'd endured to get here. She'd thought she'd finally found safety. Now she wondered if safety was something people like her ever really got to have. In the main house, Cole couldn't sleep either. He sat on his porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness, listening for anything out of place. He'd meant what he said to Maggie. He'd protect her, stand between her and harm, do whatever was necessary to keep her safe. What he hadn't said, what he was only beginning to admit to himself, was why her safety mattered so much to him. It went beyond simple decency, beyond the responsibility an employer had for his employee. It went, he suspected, to a place he'd thought closed off forever when he'd buried Sarah. He was falling for Maggie Bell, slowly, carefully, against every intention he'd had when he'd hired her. He was falling for her quiet strength, her honest eyes, her capable hands and generous heart. He was falling for the way she'd brought his house back to life without erasing Sarah's memory. He was falling for her courage in the face of fear, her determination to stand still instead of run. And now that fragile, growing thing between them was threatened by a man who saw her as property, who would hurt her for daring to claim her own life. "Not on my watch," Cole said quietly to the night. "She's made it this far. I'll be damned if I let him take her back." The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human concerns. The desert night breathed around him, vast and ancient and patient. Cole sat vigil until dawn began to paint the eastern sky, then finally went inside to begin another day. They didn't speak of the letter again for several days, returning instead to the comfortable rhythms of work and shared meals. But the knowledge of Frank's pursuit colored everything now, added an edge to otherwise peaceful moments. Maggie found herself watching the horizon more often, tensing at unexpected sounds. Cole kept his rifle closer than before, checked the approach roads more frequently. Old Pete noticed the change immediately when he arrived for his regular visit. "Something's got you both spooked," he observed, watching Cole and Maggie work together on the fence line. "Want to tell me what it is?" Cole glanced at Maggie, who nodded permission. "Maggie's ex-husband. He's been asking around Kansas about where she went. There's reason to believe he might come looking for her." Pete's expression hardened. "Abusive?" "Yes," Maggie said quietly. "Law know about it. Law in Kansas didn't care much. The law here? We're planning to talk to the sheriff, make him aware. Pete was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I've known men like that. Had a sister married to one back before the war. He killed her eventually. Beat her to death over a burnt dinner. His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were cold. I was too young to stop him then. I'm not too young now. Pete, we're not asking you to— Didn't ask, Pete interrupted Cole. But you got a problem. I'm part of solving it. That's what we do out here. We look after our own. He looked directly at Maggie. You're part of this ranch now, girl. That makes you ours to protect. The simple declaration brought tears to Maggie's eyes. She'd spent so long alone, so long believing that her problems were hers alone to solve. The idea that people she barely knew would stand beside her, would claim her as family, was almost too much to process. Thank you, she managed. Nothing to thank me for. Just stating facts. Pete pulled a knife from his belt, tested its edge. Man comes around here meaning harm. He'll find out quick that this isn't Kansas, and we don't take kindly to wife-beaters. That evening, the three of them rode into town together. The territorial sheriff, a grizzled man named Clarence Hartwell, listened to their story with a grave expression. Problem is, he said when they'd finished, until he actually does something here in Arizona, there's not much I can do legally. Can't arrest a man for thinking about finding his wife, even if he's coming here to hurt her, Cole demanded. Even then, best I can do is make a note of it, keep an ear out for anyone asking questions about a woman matching Miss Bell's description. Hartwell looked at Maggie with sympathy. I believe you, ma'am, and if he shows up making threats, I'll handle it. But the law's got limits, especially when it comes to domestic matters. So she's just supposed to wait for him to show up and hurt her before you'll do anything. Cole's frustration was evident. That's how it works, son. I don't like it any better than you do, but I can't change the law. Hartwell paused. What I can do is suggest you take precautions. Keep weapons handy. Don't let Miss Bell go anywhere alone. And if this Frank character does show up, you come get me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. They left the sheriff's office with little more than they'd had going in. Official awareness of the threat, but no real protection against it. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. We'll manage, Pete said finally. Always have, always will. He's right, Cole added. Law or no law, you're not facing this alone. Maggie wanted to believe them. But as they rode through the gathering darkness toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that Frank was out there somewhere, getting closer, bringing violence with him like a storm building on the horizon. All they could do was wait and prepare, and hope that when the storm finally broke, they'd be strong enough to weather it. Early June brought longer days and warmer nights. The ranch continued its rhythm of work and small pleasures, morning coffee, shared meals, evening conversations that stretched later as comfort between Cole and Maggie deepened. If not for the shadow of Frank's threat, it would have been an almost perfect time. One afternoon, Cole disappeared into the barn for several hours. When he emerged, he carried something wrapped in cloth. He found Maggie in the garden, kneeling between rows of young plants that were finally thriving under her care. Got something for you, he said, settling onto the ground beside her despite his dusty work clothes. What is it? Just something I'd made a while back. Thought maybe it was time it saw some use. He handed her the bundle. Maggie unwrapped the cloth to reveal a beautifully carved wooden horse, no bigger than her palm. Every detail was perfect, the flowing mane, the muscled legs, the gentle curve of the neck. It had been sanded smooth and oiled until it glowed. Cole, this is beautiful. Made it about 5 years ago. His voice was careful, controlled. Sarah and we'd been trying for a baby. She'd had 2 miscarriages already, but we were hoping. I carved this thinking about the child we'd have someday. Something to pass down, he paused. Then she lost the 3rd pregnancy, and the doctor said it would be dangerous to try again. We put away dreams of children after that. Maggie held the horse gently, understanding the weight of what he was sharing. This must have been hard to hold on to. It was. Still is in some ways. But I've been thinking Sarah and I couldn't have children, but that doesn't mean this has to sit in a drawer forever. Tommy's birthday is next week. He's a good kid, works hard, always respectful. I thought maybe— Cole met her eyes. I thought maybe it was time to let it belong to someone who'd appreciate it. He'll love it. Will you help me give it to him? Feels like it should come from both of us. The question implied connection, partnership, a both of us that went beyond employer and employee. Maggie felt her heart quicken at the significance. Of course I will. They sat together in the garden, the wooden horse between them, sharing a moment of quiet understanding. Cole had trusted her with one of his deepest losses, the children he'd never have, the future that had been stolen along with Sarah's life. And in offering to give the horse to Tommy together, he was acknowledging that they were building something new, not replacing what was lost, but honoring it by letting go. Sarah would have liked you, Cole said suddenly. She always said she could judge a person's character by how they treated animals and children. You're gentle with both, patient, that would have mattered to her. I wish I could have known her in a way you do. Through her recipes, through the things she built here, through the way she shaped this ranch and my life. He picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers. I used to think loving her meant keeping everything exactly as she left it. Now I think loving her means letting the ranch grow and change the way she would have wanted it to. What changed your mind? You did. He looked at her directly. You showed up and didn't try to erase her or compete with her memory. You just existed alongside it, made space for both past and present. That's a gift, Maggie. A rare one. Before Maggie could respond, they heard Tommy's voice calling from the barn. Cole stood, offering his hand to help her up. Their fingers lingered together for a moment longer than necessary. A small gesture weighted with possibility. We should get back to work, Cole said. But he was smiling. Yes, Maggie agreed. We should. But both of them knew something had shifted. The walls they'd built around their hearts were crumbling, brick by careful brick, revealing the possibility of connection underneath. Tommy's birthday arrived on a Saturday. They celebrated simply. A special dinner Maggie prepared using recipes from Sarah's cookbook, a cake that only slightly tilted to one side, and the presentation of the wooden horse. Tommy held it like it was made of glass, his eyes wide with wonder. Mr. Taggart, I can't. This is too much. It's not too much, Cole said firmly. You're a good worker and a good young man. You've earned it. We thought you should have it, Maggie added, emphasizing the we just slightly. Tommy looked between them, his young face suddenly understanding something the adults had barely admitted to themselves. Thank you, both of you. I'll keep it forever. After Tommy left that evening, carefully clutching his treasure, Cole and Maggie found themselves alone on the porch. The summer evening was warm, the air still carrying the day's heat. Stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. That was good, Maggie said, giving him the horse. Yeah, Cole leaned back in his chair. Felt right. Like I was choosing life over grief, you know. Like I was saying it's okay to move forward, is it? Okay, I mean? I think so. I think Sarah would want me to keep living, not just existing. She wouldn't want me frozen in place, afraid to feel anything again. What do you feel? The question was soft, almost tentative. Cole took a breath, considering his words carefully. I feel like I've been walking through darkness for 3 years, and somewhere along the way, someone lit a candle. The darkness is still there. It'll always be there in some ways. But there's light now, too. I feel that, too, Maggie admitted. Like I've been running so long I forgot what it was to stand still. And now, she paused, now I don't want to run anymore. Then don't. Cole's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. Stay, build something here. With me, it wasn't quite a declaration of love, not yet. But it was close. It was an acknowledgement of what was growing between them, a recognition that whatever they were building was worth protecting. Maggie squeezed his hand, holding on like he was an anchor in a storm. I'm trying, but I'm scared, Cole. Scared that Frank will show up. Scared that I'll bring violence to this place. Scared that... Her voice dropped to a whisper. Scared that I'll let myself care and then lose everything again. I'm scared too, Cole admitted. Losing Sarah nearly broke me. The thought of caring that much again, of risking that kind of pain, it terrifies me. He turned to look at her, his face serious in the starlight. But I'm more scared of living the rest of my life alone, of letting fear win. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped, hearts opening despite every reason to keep them closed. Around them, the ranch settled into evening. Horses nickering in the barn, cattle lowing in the distance, the endless symphony of crickets and night birds. Finally, Maggie spoke. "I'm not good at this. At trusting. At letting someone close. Neither am I. We'll figure it out together. What if Frank comes? Then we'll handle it. Together." Cole repeated the word deliberately, making it a promise. "You're not alone anymore, Maggie. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Maggie echoed, testing the word, finding comfort in it. They stayed on the porch until the stars filled the sky, hands still clasped, neither wanting to break the moment. When they finally said goodnight, it was with an understanding that something had changed. They'd moved from friendship toward something deeper, something that felt like the beginning of love, careful and cautious and worth protecting. In her cabin that night, Maggie pulled out Sarah's cookbook and turned to a blank page. By lamplight, she wrote a new recipe, not for food, but for hope. She called it Hope Bread and listed its ingredients: patience, honest work, daily kindness, and the courage to stand still. The instructions were simple. Combine ingredients carefully, let rise slowly, handle with care, share generously. It was whimsical, maybe even silly, but it felt true. This was what she and Cole were building, something that required patience and care, something that couldn't be rushed, something worth sharing. She closed the book and extinguished the lamp, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the feel of Cole's hand in hers, to the steady certainty in his voice when he said together. She'd spent 2 years believing she was better off alone, that needing someone was weakness. Now she was beginning to understand that letting someone in might actually be the bravest thing she'd ever done. In the main house, Cole stood by his bedroom door, the door to the room he'd shared with Sarah, the room he hadn't slept in since her death. His hand rested on the doorknob, and for the first time in 3 years, he almost turned it, almost. Not yet, but soon. He was getting there, one small step at a time. He pulled Sarah's wedding ring from where he'd stored it in the box on his dresser, held it in his palm, feeling its familiar weight. Then, with a sense of ceremony, he carefully placed it back in the box and closed the lid. "I loved you, Sarah," he said quietly. "I'll always love you. But I think there might be room in my life to love someone else too. Not instead of you, just alongside." The house was silent, but somehow it felt like blessing rather than reproach. Cole returned the box to the dresser, then finally removed the leather cord from around his neck, the cord that had held Sarah's ring for 3 years. It felt strange to be without it, like missing a familiar weight, but it also felt right. Like he was finally taking a step forward, instead of standing frozen in grief. He went to bed that night thinking about Maggie, about the way she'd looked at him in the starlight, about the promise implicit in their clasped hands. Fear still lived in him, fear of loss, fear of pain, fear of opening his heart only to have it broken again. But hope lived there too now, fragile and growing, but real. And sometimes hope was enough to begin with. The next 2 weeks were the closest thing to perfect that either Cole or Maggie had known in years. They worked side by side in the summer heat, their movements synchronized from familiarity. They shared meals and conversation, coffee and comfortable silences. Small gestures of affection appeared, Cole bringing Maggie wildflowers he'd found while checking cattle, Maggie mending his favorite shirt with tiny, careful stitches. They began sitting closer on the porch in the evenings, shoulders nearly touching. Their hands found each other with increasing frequency, brief touches that felt like conversations. They were learning each other slowly, carefully, respecting the wounded places while exploring the possibility of something beautiful. One evening, Maggie picked a desert wildflower, a small yellow bloom that somehow thrived in the harsh landscape. She pressed it between the pages of Sarah's cookbook, a gesture that felt significant. When Cole found it later, tucked next to a recipe for stew, he understood immediately. Maggie was making peace with Sarah's presence, finding her own place in the narrative of this ranch while honoring what came before. He left the flower where it was, touched by the gentle acknowledgement. Their almost kiss happened on a Thursday evening after they'd spent the day repairing the barn roof. They were both tired, both dusty, standing close as they examined their work. Cole said something about Sarah teaching him to check for weak spots, and Maggie responded with a story about her father's barn-building wisdom. They turned toward each other without planning to, suddenly near enough to feel each other's breath. Cole's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from Maggie's face. Their eyes met and held. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility. Then old Pete's voice called from the yard, "Got a sick calf down here. Need a hand?" They stepped apart, the moment broken but not forgotten. Cole went to help Pete, while Maggie watched from the barn, her heart racing, her lips tingling with anticipation of what hadn't quite happened. Later, alone in the kitchen, Cole found himself replaying the moment. The way Maggie had looked at him, the way she'd leaned almost imperceptibly closer, the permission in her eyes. He'd wanted to kiss her. God, how he'd wanted to, but something had held him back beyond Pete's interruption. Some part of him that needed to be absolutely certain. Certain of his feelings, certain he was ready, certain he wasn't using Maggie to fill a hole Sarah had left. Certain that what he felt was real and new and chosen. Not just a desperate grasp at not being alone. He needed to tell her, to voice what was growing between them before they went any further. She deserved honesty, deserved to know where his heart stood. He found Maggie in her cabin, writing in Sarah's cookbook by lamplight. She looked up at his knock, smiled in welcome. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course." She set down her pen, gestured to the other chair. Cole sat, suddenly uncertain how to begin. I need to tell you something." "All right. I haven't felt alive in 3 years." The words came out in a rush. "Since Sarah died, I've just been going through motions. Working, because that's what you do. Eating because you have to. Sleeping when exhaustion forced me to. But actually living, actually feeling things. I'd forgotten how." Maggie listened quietly, her face open and understanding. "Then you showed up," Cole continued. "And slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice it happening, things started changing. The house felt like a home again. Morning coffee felt like something to look forward to, instead of just another task. I started thinking about tomorrow instead of just surviving today. Cole, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "What I'm trying to say is that you changed something in me. You brought life back to this place, and to me, and I think I'm falling for you, Maggie Bell. Or maybe I've already fallen. I'm not good at this, at feelings and words, but I needed you to know. Before anything else happens between us, you needed to know where I stand." Maggie's eyes had filled with tears. "I'm scared," she said honestly. "I'm scared to trust this, scared to believe it's real, scared that I'll wake up and it'll be gone, or that Frank will show up and destroy it, or that I'll somehow ruin it because I don't know how to do this right." Do what right? This, love, partnership. I only ever knew it to be painful and confusing. What Frank and I had, that wasn't love, I know that now. But it's all I have to compare to, and I don't want to bring those broken patterns here. Cole reached across the small space between them, took both her hands in his. Then we learned together, both of us fumbling through, both of us scared, both of us choosing to try anyway. We go slow, we're honest. We don't repeat past mistakes. What about Sarah? I don't want to be a replacement. You're not. You could never be. Sarah was Sarah, and what we had was real and good and ended. You're Maggie, and what we're building is different and new and beginning. There's room in my heart for both, memory and possibility. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. But it's also, he squeezed her hands gently, it's also the best thing I've felt in 3 years. And I don't want to lose it because we're both too scared to take a chance. Maggie studied their joined hands, then looked up to meet his eyes. I need you to know something too. I'm not good at being vulnerable, at letting someone see the broken parts. Frank taught me to hide, to make myself small, to never show weakness. Those patterns, they're deep. We'll work on them together. There was that word again, together. The promise that had been building between them since that first evening on the porch, solidifying into something real and chosen. I'm falling for you too, Maggie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been fighting it because it scares me. But when you hold my hand or smile at something I've said or work beside me like we're two parts of one whole, I feel like maybe I could be happy. Maybe I could have this. Then let's have it. Slowly, carefully, honestly. But let's have it. They sat in the lamplight, hands clasped, hearts opening to possibility, despite every reason to stay closed. Outside, the desert night breathed around them. Inside, something precious was being built from courage and honesty and hard-won hope. "Cole," Maggie said softly. "Yeah? Would you stay a while? Just be here. I don't want to be alone tonight. I can do that." They moved to sit on her narrow bed, backs against the wall, still holding hands. They talked into the night, about Sarah and Frank, about pain and healing, about what they hoped for and what they feared. They talked about the ranch and the future, about small dreams and careful plans. And when they finally fell asleep, sitting shoulder to shoulder, hands still intertwined, both felt something they hadn't felt in years. Safe enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to hope, strong enough to choose love despite knowing how much it could cost. In the morning, they'd go back to work, to practical concerns and daily labor. But the words had been spoken, the feelings acknowledged. They were building something together now, consciously and carefully, one honest moment at a time, and for two people who'd learned the hard way that life offered no guarantees. That felt like more than enough to build on. It was July when everything shattered. The afternoon started ordinarily enough. Cole and Maggie were working in the south pasture, checking on new calves. Old Pete had gone to town for supplies. Tommy was in the barn tending horses. The summer heat was oppressive, but familiar. The kind of day where work proceeded slowly and water breaks were frequent. The rider appeared around 3 o'clock, emerging from the heat, shimmer like something conjured from nightmare. He was official-looking, wearing a badge, sitting straight in his saddle despite the obvious long journey behind him. As he approached the ranch house, Cole felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "Stay here," he told Maggie, but she followed anyway, her face pale. The rider dismounted, touched his hat brim politely. "Afternoon. I'm looking for the Taggart Ranch." "You found it." Cole kept his voice even. "I'm Cole Taggart, Deputy Marshal Warren, out of Santa Fe." He pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I'm looking for a Margaret Bell, formerly of Lawrence, Kansas." "Would she be here?" Maggie stepped forward before Cole could respond. "I'm Maggie Bell." Warren's expression was professional but not unkind. "Ma'am, I have papers here regarding your person. Seems there's been charges filed in Kansas." "Your husband—" "Ex-husband," Maggie interrupted, her voice shaking. "Your husband," Warren continued firmly, "Deputy Marshal Franklin Bell of Lawrence, Kansas, has filed charges stating that you abandoned your lawful marriage, stole money and property belonging to him, and fled the state to avoid prosecution." The words landed like blows. Cole felt Maggie sway beside him, caught her elbow to steady her. "Those charges are false," Cole said. "Maggie left an abusive marriage with nothing but what belonged to her." "That may well be, sir, but I'm not here to adjudicate the case. I'm here to deliver papers demanding Mrs. Bell's return to Kansas to face said charges within 2 weeks' time." "She's not going back to Kansas," Cole stated flatly. Warren sighed. "Sir, I understand your concern, but the law is the law. Interstate cooperation between territories and states is growing, and Deputy Marshal Bell has followed all proper procedures. Frank Bell is a liar and an abuser," Maggie said, finding her voice. "He beat me regularly for years. I left to save my own life. Ma'am, that's something to bring before a judge. But right now, these papers are legal and binding." Warren hesitated, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, something about this case didn't sit right with me. A lawman filing charges against his own wife, well, it raises questions. But I'm bound by my duty. What happens if she doesn't go?" Cole asked. "Then warrants will be issued for her arrest. Any marshal or sheriff in any territory will be obligated to take her into custody and transport her back to Kansas." Warren looked genuinely sympathetic. "I'd advise complying with the order, ma'am. Get yourself a lawyer. Present your case properly. Fighting this will only make things worse." After Warren left, Maggie stood frozen in the yard, the papers clutched in her shaking hands. Cole read over her shoulder, his fury growing with each word. Frank had been thorough. He'd documented purchases in his name that he claimed Maggie stole. He'd reported the horse as his property. He'd presented himself as a wronged husband and lawman, making Maggie look like a criminal. "It's all lies," Maggie whispered. "The money was from my mother's estate. The horse I bought with my own saved wages. But he has papers, Cole. He has documentation that makes his lies look like truth. Then we'll fight it. We'll get a lawyer, prove his claims false. How? It's his word against mine, and he's a deputy marshal. What judge is going to believe me over him?" Her voice rose with panic. "Don't you see? He's been planning this since I left. He knew I'd run, and he made sure he'd have a legal way to drag me back." Tommy had emerged from the barn, sensing trouble. Old Pete was returning from town, his mule laden with supplies. They gathered in the yard, a small council of war. "What's the situation?" Pete asked, reading the tension immediately. Cole explained quickly. Pete's face darkened as he listened, his hand moving unconsciously to the knife at his belt. "That son of a—" Pete caught himself, glanced at Maggie. "Pardon my language, ma'am, but this is dirty pool. Using the law to abuse his wife is the coward's way. The real problem," Cole said slowly, "is that Frank's not just an abusive drunk. He's a deputy marshal with connections and resources. He's weaponized his position to make Maggie look like a criminal. There's more," Warren had said before leaving, clearly uncomfortable. "Deputy Bell has indicated he may travel to Arizona himself to ensure the matter is resolved. Said he wants to personally escort his wife back to Kansas. The implication was clear. Frank was coming. Not just sending papers, but coming himself, bringing violence wrapped in legal authority. We don't have 2 weeks, Maggie said numbly. If Frank's coming here, he could arrive any time. And when he does, she couldn't finish the sentence. They stood in the yard as the sun beat down, 4 people facing an impossible situation. The law was on Frank's side, at least on paper. Running would make Maggie a fugitive. Staying meant waiting for Frank to arrive with legal authority to take her. There might be a way, Pete said slowly. It's not perfect and it requires some quick thinking, but there might be a way. What are you thinking? Cole asked. Marriage. Pete looked between Cole and Maggie. If Miss Maggie was to marry you proper, Cole, her legal status would change. She'd be Margaret Taggart, not Margaret Bell. Arizona territory, not Kansas. Different jurisdiction, different name, different legal standing. Would that actually work? Tommy asked. Might buy time. Might give her legal protections she doesn't have now. And it would sure complicate Frank's claims. Can't charge a woman with abandoning a marriage that's legally ended because she's married to someone else. Cole turned to Maggie. What do you think? I think... Maggie struggled to form words through her panic. I think I won't trap you in a marriage just to save myself. That's not fair to you. What if it's not a trap? Cole took her hands. What if it's just moving up a timeline we were already on? Maggie, we've been building toward this. Slowly, carefully, but building nonetheless. Marriage for legal protection, yes. But also marriage because it's what we both want. Eventually. Eventually isn't now. Eventually means we have time to be sure, to do it right. Tears streamed down her face. I can't ask you to marry me under these circumstances. What if you come to regret it? I won't. You don't know that. I do know it. Cole's voice was firm, certain. Maggie Bell, I was going to ask you eventually anyway. Frank showing up just means we do it on our terms, with our reasons, not letting him dictate our choices. But the question stands. Will you marry me? Cole, not because you have to, not because you're trapped, but because we chose each other, because what we're building is worth protecting, because love showed up wearing work boots and you decided not to run from it. He squeezed her hands. Marry me, Maggie. The yard was silent except for the wind and Maggie's quiet crying. Old Pete and Tommy stood witnessing, understanding the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a practical solution. It was a declaration, a commitment, a choice to face danger together rather than apart. Yes, Maggie finally whispered. Not because I'm running. Because I'm finally standing still. Yes, they rode to town that afternoon. All 4 of them, Cole and Maggie, Pete and Tommy. The territorial judge, the same Clarence Hartwell who served as sheriff. agreed to perform the ceremony immediately once he understood the situation. "I'll need to file the paperwork officially," Hartwell said. "Creates a legal record that she's Margaret Taggart now, married in Arizona territory. Won't stop Frank from making trouble, but it'll make his claims more complicated to enforce." The ceremony was simple, held in Hartwell's office with Pete and Tommy as witnesses. Cole had no ring to offer, but Maggie didn't care. They wrote their own vows, standing in front of Hartwell's desk, while the afternoon light slanted through dusty windows. "I promise honesty," Cole said, his hands holding Maggie's. "I promise partnership. I promise to stand beside you in whatever comes, to be the shelter you need when storms hit, to honor both your strength and your vulnerability." "I promise trust," Maggie responded, her voice steady despite her tears. "I promise to let you see my broken places and believe you won't use them against me. I promise to build a future with you while respecting the past you carry. I promise to stay, even when staying is hard." Hartwell pronounced them married, and Cole kissed Maggie for the first time, gentle, reverent, tasting of salt and promise. It wasn't the wedding either of them might have imagined, but it was real and chosen and theirs. They signed the papers. Hartwell filed them officially. By the time they left town, the sun was setting, and Maggie Bell was legally Margaret Taggart, wife of Cole Taggart, resident of Arizona territory, on the ride back to the ranch. They were quiet, processing what had happened. Tommy was excited, Pete was satisfied, but Cole and Maggie were wrapped in the enormity of it. They'd married for practical reasons, but with real emotion underneath. They'd chosen each other despite danger, despite fear, despite every reason to be cautious. "Are you all right?" Cole asked Maggie quietly as the ranch came into view. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm terrified. I'm grateful. I'm confused about what happens next. But I'm—" She paused, searching for the right word. "I'm not alone." "That's something. You're not alone," Cole confirmed. "Whatever Frank brings, whatever happens next, you're not alone." That night, they sat on the porch of the main house, now their house, their home together. The marriage was legal, but not yet consummated. Both of them too overwhelmed by circumstances to think about intimacy beyond the simple comfort of sitting close. "He's coming," Maggie said. "Frank, he won't accept this. He'll come anyway. I know, he'll be angry. Angrier than I've ever seen him, probably. And when Frank gets angry," she shuddered, remembering, "then we'll face it." Cole put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "But we'll face it with you as my wife, on my land, with the law on our side as much as it can be. You're not the woman who ran from Kansas anymore, Maggie. You're Margaret Taggart, and that means something out here. Does it change who I am? It changes how the law sees you, how the territory sees you. But more than that," Cole turned to face her, "it changes how you see yourself. You're not running anymore. You're planted. You're home." Maggie leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. She'd married Cole Taggart today, in a rushed ceremony driven by necessity. But underneath the panic and fear, she'd also married him because she loved him. Because, in the months since arriving at this ranch, he'd shown her what partnership could look like. What love could look like when it wasn't wrapped in violence and control. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For choosing me. For making me your wife, even though it complicates your life. You're not a complication, Maggie. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 3 years." He kissed the top of her head. "Now we just have to make sure Frank understands that he lost. That you're not his anymore. That he has no power here." They sat under the stars, newly married, facing an uncertain future. Frank was coming, that was certain. Violence was coming with him, that too was certain. But they would face it together, bound now not just by affection, but by law, not just by choice, but by commitment. In the morning, they would prepare. They would make plans, gather allies, ready themselves for confrontation. But tonight, they held each other and called it enough. They'd survived this long by taking things one day at a time. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing whatever it brought. Tonight they were married, they were together, and they were home. That, for now, had to be sufficient. 2 days after the wedding, Cole made a decision. He rode to town alone over Maggie's protests and sent telegrams to everyone he could think of who might have information about Frank Bell. the Kansas Marshal's office. Law enforcement contacts his father had maintained, even Evelyn Marsh, Maggie's former neighbor, asking for any details about Frank's reputation and behavior that could be documented. The response from Kansas came quicker than expected, delivered by the weekly mail coach 3 days later. Cole read the telegram with growing interest, then rode straight to find Maggie in the garden. "You need to see this," he said, handing her the paper. The telegram was from the Kansas Marshal's office, signed by a Marshal James Patterson. It read, "Re Franklin Bell, Deputy Marshal this office. Currently under investigation, multiple complaints, excessive force, misconduct. Badge status under review. Advise Bell not authorized, represent this office in private matters. Any claims made regarding wife should be treated as personal, not professional. He's under investigation," Maggie said slowly, reading it twice to make sure she understood. "Frank's under investigation. His badge might be suspended, which means," Cole said carefully, "that those papers Warren delivered might not be worth much. If Frank's badge is under review, his authority to file charges is questionable." Hope flickered in Maggie's chest, dangerous and bright. But he could still come. Investigation or not, he could still show up here. True, but he'd be coming as a private citizen, not a lawman. That changes things considerably. Cole took the telegram back, studying it. "We need to get this to Sheriff Hartwell. Make sure he knows Frank's status is questionable." They rode to town together that afternoon, bringing the telegram to Hartwell's office. The sheriff read it with a grim smile. "This helps," he said. "Helps a lot. If Frank shows up claiming legal authority, I've got grounds to question it. Can't arrest him just for showing up, but I can sure make it clear he's not acting in any official capacity." "What if he gets violent?" Maggie asked. "Then he's just another man causing trouble, and I'll handle him accordingly." Hartwell looked at them both seriously. "But I won't lie to you, this situation is still dangerous. A man who's losing his authority, losing his wife, losing his sense of control, that's a powder keg waiting to explode. You need to stay vigilant." The ride back to the ranch was quieter but less heavy. The telegram had shifted something, given them a weapon against Frank that they hadn't had before. It didn't eliminate the danger, but it reduced it from certain catastrophe to manageable crisis. "We're going to be all right," Cole said as the ranch came into view. "Whatever happens, we've got more going for us now than we did 3 days ago." "Marriage and a telegram," Maggie said wryly. "Quite the defensive strategy. Don't forget old Pete and his knife, and Tommy's surprisingly good aim with a rifle." Despite everything, Maggie laughed. It felt good, releasing some of the tension that had been building for days. They were still in danger, still waiting for Frank to show up. But they were also building defenses, gathering information, preparing as best they could. That evening they made plans. Cole showed Maggie where he kept weapons, the rifle, the shotgun, the pistol that had been his father's. They discussed scenarios. What if Frank showed up during the day when they were working? What if he came at night? What if he brought others with him? Old Pete contributed his knowledge of tactics, of how men like Frank thought and acted. Tommy practiced with the rifle until his shots were consistently accurate. They were creating a small army, a defensive unit centered on protecting Maggie and the life they'd all built together. "This is what family does," Pete said one evening as they all gathered after dinner. "We look after each other. Frank Bell is going to learn that Maggie's not alone anymore. She's got people who'll stand between her and harm." "I never thought," Maggie's voice caught. "I never thought I'd have this. People willing to fight for me." "Well, you've got it now," Tommy said firmly, with the certainty of youth. "And we're not letting anyone hurt you." That night, Cole and Maggie retired to the main house together. Their house now, though they'd maintained separate sleeping spaces out of a mixture of respect and overwhelm. But tonight, Maggie paused at the door to her cabin, then turned toward the main house instead. "Can I—" she started. "Would it be all right if I slept in the house tonight? I don't want to be alone." "You never have to ask," Cole said. "This is your home now." He gave her the guest room, the one he'd moved into after Sarah's death. It was comfortable, if plain, and the knowledge that Cole was just down the hall made Maggie feel safer than she had in days. Before she closed her door for the night, she found him in the kitchen making tea. "Cole?" She waited until he looked at her. "I meant what I said in our vows, about building a future with you. This isn't just legal protection for me. You know that, right?" "I know." He crossed to her, cupped her face gently in his hands. "And I meant what I said too. Honesty, partnership, standing beside you. That's not just words, Maggie. That's my promise." He kissed her then, longer than their first kiss in Hartwell's office, deeper. It tasted like commitment and trust, like two people choosing each other despite danger, despite fear, despite everything that said they should protect their hearts better. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We're going to be all right," Maggie said, echoing Cole's words from earlier. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." They said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, but both felt the pull toward something more. Not yet. There was still too much unsettled, too much danger looming. But soon, when Frank was dealt with, when the threat was past, they would build the marriage they'd rushed into. They would make it real in all the ways that mattered. For now, it was enough to know they'd chosen each other, that they were partners in truth, not just on paper, that whatever storm was coming, they'd weather it together. In her room, Maggie touched the plain gold band Cole had bought in town the day after their wedding, a proper ring to replace the absent one from the ceremony. It felt strange on her finger, unfamiliar and precious at once. She'd worn Frank's ring for years, a symbol of ownership and control. This ring felt different. This one felt like freedom. In his room, Cole stared at the ceiling and thought about the future, about Frank's eventual arrival and the confrontation that would come, about the woman sleeping down the hall who'd become his wife so quickly, about Sarah and the love he'd lost, and Maggie and the love he was building. "I'm doing the right thing," he said quietly to the darkness. "I know I am." And for the first time since Sarah's death, Cole Taggart fell asleep with hope for tomorrow, instead of just resignation to survive it. Frank arrived on a Tuesday morning, and he didn't come alone. Maggie was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching, 3 of them, visible in the distance as heat shimmer resolved into solid forms. Her heart stopped. She knew, with absolute certainty, that one of those riders was Frank. She recognized something in the way he sat his horse, the aggressive posture she'd learned to read during 7 years of marriage. She ran to find Cole, who was in the barn with Tommy. "They're here. 3 riders. One of them is Frank, I'm sure of it." Cole's face went hard. "Tommy, get Pete. Both of you take positions like we discussed. And for God's sake, don't do anything unless I give the word." He turned to Maggie. "You're going inside now." "No, I need to face him." "Maggie, Cole, no." Her voice was firm despite her fear. "I spent years hiding from him, making myself small, letting fear control me. I'm not doing that anymore. We face this together. That's what we promised." He wanted to argue, wanted to lock her away somewhere safe, where Frank's violence couldn't reach her. But he also understood what she was saying. Running and hiding had brought her here, to this confrontation. The only way through was to stand firm. "You stay beside me," he said. "And if things get violent, you get behind me. Deal?" "Deal." They walked out to meet the riders together, Pete and Tommy taking flanking positions near the barn and house respectively. Cole's rifle was in the house, loaded and ready if needed. Pete had his knife. Tommy had the shotgun. They were as prepared as they could be for whatever came next. The riders resolved into 3 men as they got closer. Frank in the center, large and imposing, his deputy marshal badge catching sunlight. The other 2 wore badges too. Legitimate law enforcement, or just Frank's friends playing dress-up, it was hard to tell. All 3 were armed. They stopped about 20 feet from where Cole and Maggie stood, near enough for conversation, but far enough to be wary. Frank's eyes locked onto Maggie with an intensity that made her skin crawl. It was a look she remembered too well, possession and fury mixed together into something toxic. "Margaret." Frank's voice was deceptively calm. "Time to come home." "This is my home," Maggie said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere with you. That's not your choice to make. You're my wife. You abandoned our marriage and stole from me. I've got legal papers." "Those papers aren't worth the paper they're printed on," Cole interrupted. "And she's not your wife anymore. She's mine." We got married 5 days ago, legal and proper, registered with the territorial office. Frank's face went dark red. His hand moved to his weapon, and immediately Pete and Tommy shifted position, making their own weapons visible. The two men with Frank noticed, their hands moving to their guns as well. "Easy now," one of Frank's companions said. "Nobody needs to do anything stupid." "Too late for that," Frank spat. "This bastard stole my wife. That's a hanging offense some places. She's not property to be stolen," Cole said. "And you're not a legitimate lawman anymore, are you, Frank? Heard you're under investigation back in Kansas. Badge about to be pulled for abuse of authority. So why don't you turn around and ride back where you came from before this gets ugly? Not without Margaret. Her name's Maggie Taggart now. And she's not going anywhere." Frank dismounted in one swift motion, his companions following suit. The tension ratcheted up instantly. Cole moved slightly in front of Maggie, subtle but clear. Pete and Tommy closed in, forming a protective semicircle. "You think marrying her changes anything?" Frank's voice had gone cold, dangerous. "You think some rush ceremony makes her yours instead of mine? I know her. I know what she is, a whore who'll spread her legs for any man who'll feed her. That what she did? Fuck you for a place to sleep." "Watch your mouth." Cole's voice was low, deadly. "You're on my land, and you're talking about my wife. I'll give you one chance to leave peacefully. Take it, or what? You'll shoot a lawman? That'll look real good for you. You're not a lawman. You're a drunk and a wife-beater who's about to learn what happens when you threaten people out here." Cole hadn't raised his voice, but the certainty in it was absolute. "Last chance, Frank, right away." For a moment it seemed like Frank might actually back down. Then his eyes shifted to Maggie, and something in him snapped. He lunged forward, trying to grab her. Cole moved faster, intercepting him, the two men colliding hard. Frank was bigger, but Cole was angrier, fueled by protective fury. They struggled, Frank trying to get around Cole to reach Maggie, Cole blocking him at every turn. One of Frank's companions moved to help him, but found Pete's knife at his throat instantly. "Don't," Pete said quietly. "Don't even think about it." The other companion had Tommy's shotgun pointed at his chest, the boy's hands steady despite his young age. "Drop your weapon," Tommy ordered, and after a tense moment the man complied. Frank and Cole were still grappling, but the tide was turning. Cole got Frank in a hold that brought him to his knees, twisting his arm behind his back hard enough to make Frank cry out in pain. "You're done," Cole said, breathing hard. "You're done hurting her. You're done claiming her. You're done, period. She's my wife," Frank shouted. "She was your wife. She was the woman you beat and terrorized for years. Now she's married to me, living on my land, under my protection. And if you ever come near her again, I will kill you. Is that clear?" The moment stretched, dangerous and sharp. Then they heard hoofbeats, and Sheriff Hartwell rode into view with 2 deputies of his own. "Heard there might be trouble out here," Hartwell said mildly, taking in the scene. "Glad I decided to check." Cole released Frank, who stumbled forward, clutching his arm. Hartwell dismounted, his hand on his weapon but not drawing it. "Deputy Marshal Bell," Hartwell said. "Or should I say former Deputy Marshal Bell. Got a telegram yesterday confirming your badge has been suspended pending investigation. Which means you're here in a private capacity, not a professional one." "She's still my wife," Frank said desperately. "No, she's not. She's Margaret Taggart, legally married to Cole Taggart in this territory 5 days ago. I performed the ceremony myself, filed the papers personally." Hartwell pulled out documents. "Everything legal and proper. Whatever claim you think you have, it's void." Frank stared at the papers, at Hartwell, at Maggie, standing beside Cole. The rage and desperation in his face was ugly to see. "You can't." "I can, and I have," Hartwell said firmly. "Now you've got 2 choices. You can mount up and ride out of Arizona, never to return. Or you can resist, in which case I'll arrest you for trespassing, assault, and making false claims under color of authority. Your choice." For a moment it seemed Frank might choose violence anyway. His hand twitched toward his weapon, but Pete's knife was still at one companion's throat, Tommy's shotgun still aimed at the other, and Hartwell's deputies had their weapons drawn now too. Frank was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and out of legal authority. Slowly the fight drained out of him, replaced by impotent fury. "This isn't over," he said to Maggie. "Yes, it is." Maggie's voice was clear and strong. "It's been over for 2 years since I left Kansas. You just refused to accept it. But I'm not yours anymore, Frank. I never was, really. You owned my fear for a long time, but you never owned me. And you don't even own my fear anymore." She stepped forward, standing directly in front of him, Cole right beside her. "I'm free of you. The law says so. My heart says so. My life says so. Go back to Kansas, Frank. Find help for your drinking. Get your life together. But leave me alone. I'm done being your victim." Frank looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, this confident, certain woman who bore little resemblance to the frightened creature he'd terrorized. Something in him seemed to break. "Mount up," Hartwell ordered Frank and his companions. "I'm escorting you to the territory line personally. And if you ever set foot in Arizona again, I'll have you arrested on sight." "That's a promise." Frank and his men mounted slowly, all the aggression draining into sullen acceptance. As they rode away under Hartwell's supervision, Frank looked back once, but Maggie didn't flinch, didn't look away. She stared him down until he turned away, defeated. When they were finally out of sight, Maggie's knees buckled. Cole caught her, holding her up as shock and relief flooded through her in equal measure. "It's over," he said. "It's really over, is it?" Maggie asked, trembling. "Will he really stay away?" "He will if he knows what's good for him," Pete said, resheathing his knife. "But even if he doesn't, we'll be ready. We've proved we can handle him, and next time we won't be so gentle." Tommy lowered the shotgun, his hands finally shaking with delayed adrenaline. "That was scary as hell," Pete finished. "But you did good, boy." Steady hands when it mattered. They stood together in the afternoon sun, Cole, Maggie, Pete, and Tommy, a makeshift family that had just proven itself capable of protecting its own. The danger might not be completely over, but they'd passed the first test. They'd stood together against a bully with a badge and sent him packing. "Let's go inside," Cole said gently. "You need to sit down," but Maggie shook her head. "No, I need—" She looked at Cole. "I need you to take me to our room." He understood what she was asking, what she needed. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They left Pete and Tommy to secure the ranch and walked to the main house together. At the threshold of the master bedroom, the room Cole had shared with Sarah, the room he hadn't entered since her death, they both paused. "Are you ready for this?" Maggie asked softly. "I think so." "With you, I think so." Cole pushed open the door. The room was exactly as Sarah had left it 3 years ago, the quilt she'd made still on the bed, her things still on the dresser. But it didn't feel like a shrine anymore. It felt like a room waiting to be lived in again. Together, they made it theirs, not erasing Sarah's presence, but adding to it, creating something new that honored the past while claiming the future. When they finally fell into bed together, it was with relief and celebration and the profound sense of having survived something terrible to reach something precious. "I love you," Maggie whispered in the afternoon light. "I love you too." Cole responded, and meant it with everything in him. They'd married for practical reasons, but they loved each other for real ones. And now, finally, they were free to build the life they both wanted, slow and careful and honest, just as they'd promised. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched under an endless sky. Inside, 2 wounded people found healing in each other's arms. The storm had passed. The future, uncertain but hopeful, lay open before them. 3 months later, autumn settled over the ranch in shades of gold and copper. The heat of summer had given way to crisp mornings and comfortable afternoons. Harvest from Maggie's garden had been abundant, the cellar now full of preserved vegetables and fruits that would see them through winter. Life had found a rhythm, gentler than before, but more secure. Frank had not returned, and word from Kansas suggested he'd been stripped of his badge entirely, his reputation destroyed by mounting evidence of abuse and corruption. The legal papers he'd filed against Maggie had been dismissed. She was free, truly free, in ways she'd never imagined possible. Cole and Maggie had grown into their marriage, learning each other's rhythms and preferences, building intimacy from daily kindness and shared work. The master bedroom was fully theirs now, filled with both Sarah's memory and their present life, a blending that felt right and earned. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant colors, they sat on the porch with coffee and Sarah's cookbook. Maggie had been adding recipes steadily, her handwriting intermingling with Sarah's until the book itself became a testament to both women and the home they'd each helped create. "Look at this," Maggie said, showing Cole a new entry. "Hope bread. Remember when I first wrote this? I thought it was silly. It's not silly. It's perfect." Cole read the recipe again. Patience, honest work, daily kindness, courage to stand still. "It's what we've been making all along. We have, haven't we?" Maggie leaned against him, comfortable and content. "Built something from nothing. Made a life out of loss and fear and determination. You did that," Cole said. "You came here with nothing but a patched coat and a dream of honest work. Look at what you've built." "We've built," Maggie corrected. Together, old Pete and Tommy arrived for their weekly dinner, a tradition that had developed over the summer. Tommy was growing taller, filling out, becoming a young man. Pete was graying further, but still sharp as ever. His jokes and wisdom equally valued. They ate together around the table. Hope bread fresh from the oven, stew made from Sarah's recipe with Maggie's additions, pie from fruit Maggie had preserved. It was a feast of small pleasures, of family chosen rather than given. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge, Pete told old stories, and Tommy asked questions about the world beyond the ranch. Cole and Maggie sat close, hands intertwined, hearts at peace. "You remember what you said that first day?" Cole asked Maggie quietly. "About not wanting love, just honest work?" "I remember. You got both, so did you." Maggie smiled. "Funny how things work out. I came here running from one man and found another. But this time I got it right. We both did." The conversation drifted easy and comfortable. Eventually, Pete and Tommy said their good nights and rode out under the stars. Cole and Maggie remained on the porch, neither wanting to go inside just yet. "Do you ever miss it?" Maggie asked. "Your old life. Before I came and complicated everything. Every day I miss Sarah, but I don't miss the emptiness. I don't miss the grief so heavy I could barely move." "You didn't complicate my life, Maggie. You saved it." Cole pulled her closer. "You showed me that loving someone new doesn't mean forgetting someone old. That there's room in a human heart for both memory and hope. You taught me what real love looks like. What real partnership feels like." Maggie turned to face him. "You taught me that work boots can be romantic if they're worn by the right person. And that love doesn't have to be grand gestures. Sometimes it's just morning coffee and evening silence and someone who sees you and stays anyway." They kissed as the stars multiplied overhead. Two people who'd found each other through loss and fear and desperate hope. Two people who'd built something real from broken pieces, who'd chosen each other again and again through crisis and calm. "We should go in," Cole said eventually. "Early start tomorrow. Pete wants help moving cattle to winter pasture." In a minute. Maggie wasn't ready to leave this moment yet. This perfect autumn evening, with stars overhead, and her husband beside her, and the future stretching open and possible before them. Cole understood. He settled back, pulling her close, content to wait as long as she needed. They'd learned patience together, learned that the best things couldn't be rushed. The ranch could wait. Sleep could wait. Tomorrow could wait. For now, they had this: peace, safety, love earned through honesty and work, and the courage to keep hoping even when hope seemed foolish. They had a home that honored the past while embracing the future. They had each other, freely chosen and deeply valued. Maggie looked out over the ranch, her ranch now, her home, her life. The desert stretched under an endless sky, beautiful and harsh and full of possibility. She'd come here seeking honest work, wanting nothing more than safety and survival. Instead, she'd found a future, found family, found love wearing work boots, and a quiet smile and steady hands that built rather than destroyed. "You were right, you know," she said softly, remembering Cole's words from months ago. "About what?" "About love showing up wearing work boots. About not running from it when it appears." She turned to kiss him again. "I'm glad I didn't run. I'm glad I stayed. So am I." Cole's arms tightened around her. "So am I." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who'd survived storms and found calm, two hearts that had been broken and learned to beat again. The wind whispered through the juniper trees, carrying the smell of sage and possibility. Inside, Sarah's cookbook lay open on the kitchen table, two women's handwriting preserved side by side. A testament to love lost and love found, to grief honored and hope embraced. To the truth that endings and beginnings often live together, braided like two threads in the same strong rope. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the small complications of daily life. But tomorrow would also bring morning coffee shared between equals, partnership built on trust, love expressed through actions as much as words. For Maggie and Cole Taggart, that was more than enough. It was everything they'd needed without knowing they needed it. It was home, and as stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent and beautiful, two people sat together on a porch in Arizona, holding hands, building hope, one quiet moment at a time. They'd asked for honest work and gotten honest love. They'd sought safety and found family. They'd run from darkness and stumbled into light. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it every single step.